The building has no power. It hasn't for years. What light exists comes from the narrow windows along the corridor, their glass cracked, clouded, filmed with dust. The sun reaches in weakly, as if uncertain it's allowed inside. The air smells like old paper and damp concrete. Chalk residue still lingers, faint but unmistakable, clinging to the walls the way smoke clings to fabric. This was a school once, not long ago in the way memory measures time, a lifetime ago in every other sense. The custodian, if that's what he still is, moves slowly, not because he's afraid of the place, he's been here many times, but because the floorboards have learned to betray weight. Every step announces itself with a hollow creak that echoes longer than it should. His flashlight stays low, sweeping the ground ahead of him. He avoids the walls. Old posters peel away at the edges. Multiplication tables, a faded map with borders that no longer exist. Someone once tried to scrape graffiti off near the stairwell, then gave up halfway through. At the end of the hall, a classroom door stands open. It always does. No one remembers the last time it was closed. Inside, the room is exactly as it was left. Rows of desks face the front, their metal legs rusted at the joints. A few chairs are missing. One desk, near the center, sits slightly apart from the rest. Not dramatically, just enough to notice, just enough to suggest interruption. As if someone stood up, as if no one pushed the chair back in. The custodian steps inside. The door shifts slightly on its hinges, but doesn't close. Wind moves through the broken window panes, carrying with it the sound of the empty grounds outside. Grass growing unchecked, a fence collapsed inward, the faint rattle of a loose sign tapping against its post. On the teacher's desk, beneath a layer of dust, lies a book, an attendance register. It's open. That too is familiar. The custodian knows this room. He knows this desk. He knows the way the book always seems to be waiting. But tonight, something is different. He stops closer than usual, raises the flashlight. The page is marked, neatly, carefully. One column for names, one for dates, one for presents. The ink hasn't faded the way the rest of the page has. It's darker, more deliberate. The handwriting is steady, almost formal. Only one name is marked, present. The custodian shifts his weight. The beam of the flashlight trembles slightly, then steadies. The room remains quiet, except for the wind and the faint ticking sound the building makes when it cools at night. Later, this moment will be described differently. Later, it will be said that an archivist found the book during a formal survey of abandoned properties, that the discovery was documented, photographed, logged, that it was handled with gloves and placed in a protective sleeve. That is all true, but this is where it began, with someone standing alone in a dark classroom, trying to understand why a record meant to confirm the living insists on doing so after everything else has moved on. The custodian finally reaches out. His fingers brush the edge of the page. It lifts slightly, reacting to the movement of air. The paper is thinner than expected, brittle at the corners. It makes a soft sound, like dry leaves touching. He lifts the register just enough to check the pages beneath. They are blank. The days before and after show nothing. No other marks, no corrections, no absences crossed out and rewritten. Just this single entry, isolated in time. As if the act itself mattered more than continuity, as if someone came here for one reason only, to be counted. The custodian closes the book carefully and tucks it under his arm. He doesn't know why. He will tell himself later that it was for safekeeping, that abandoned buildings attract scavengers, that paper like this should not be left to rot. But there is another reason, quieter and harder to admit. The register feels heavy, not in weight, in implication. When the building is locked again that night, the classroom looks no different. The desk remains out of place. The chalkboard still bears faint traces of unfinished equations. The wind continues to move through the broken windows. But the absence of the register leaves the desk strangely bare, as if something has been taken that the room was still using. The next morning, the custodian brings the register to the municipal records office. The archivist on duty listens without interruption as the story is told. He does not smile. He does not dismiss it. He has worked long enough with forgotten things to know that anomalies deserve attention. The register is logged, photographed, its condition noted. The date is confirmed. The school's closure date is confirmed as well. There is no overlap. No administrative error explains the entry. No delayed paperwork. No rescheduled program that might justify activity in the building. The name is run through local databases, school records, census data. Nothing matches. It is as if the person never officially existed, or existed only briefly, only long enough to leave a mark. In the weeks that follow, the file grows, slowly, cautiously. Former teachers are contacted. They recognize the classroom, the desk placement, the way the light falls in the afternoon. None recognize the name. Some say the handwriting looks familiar, others say it doesn't. No one is certain enough to sign a statement. A former principal insists the building was fully secured after closure, keys accounted for, alarms armed, no reports of break-ins, no reason for anyone to be inside, no reason for attendance to be taken. And yet, the mark remains. Ink does not explain itself. The archivist returns to the school alone one evening, months after the custodian first stood there. He brings no flashlight. He lets his eyes adjust to the dimness. He stands where the teacher's desk once was and listens. Buildings, when left long enough, develop their own rhythm. Pipes expand and contract. Walls settle. The wind learns which openings to use. Nothing moves in the classroom. Nothing speaks. But the absence left by the register feels pronounced. The desk seems wrong without it. The room seems unfinished, as if a process was interrupted twice, once when the school closed, and once when the book was taken away. The archivist understands then that this is not simply a clerical anomaly. It is not about trespassing or error. It is about presence, about the human need to be recorded, to be acknowledged, to be seen, even briefly, in a system designed to measure existence through ink and paper. Someone came here when no one was supposed to. Someone wrote their name where it did not belong. And someone, somewhere, needed that mark to remain. The file is opened, and it will not close easily.
File 007 was not created immediately. That detail matters. Most anomalies are logged the same day they're discovered, assigned a reference number, categorized, and either resolved or quietly forgotten. This one lingered. It sat on a shared desk for 3 weeks without a label, moved only when someone needed the space beneath it. No one wanted to decide what it was. When it was finally cataloged, it was not given a descriptive title. No attempt was made to explain it away in the name. It was entered into the system as an unresolved institutional anomaly. A neutral phrase, one that does not accuse or conclude. The school's closure date is the first thing documented in the file. It is clear, administrative, unremarkable. A final academic year shortened by budget reviews and declining enrollment. Teachers informed months in advance, parents notified, students reassigned to neighboring districts, furniture inventoried, equipment removed, utilities shut off in stages. The last staff member signed out on a Friday afternoon. The building was locked. The district's records show no authorized entry after that date. No maintenance requests, no security alerts, no temporary use permits. nothing that would suggest human presence. The discovery of the register is logged next. Date, time, weather conditions, name of the individual who found it, the room number, the exact position of the book on the desk, photographs attached, labeled, cross-referenced. Everything about the discovery follows protocol. Everything except the reaction. The custodian's statement is short. He does not speculate. He does not describe fear. He uses practical language, the kind used by someone who spends his days fixing leaks and replacing broken locks. But there is a pause in the transcript, a break where the recording continues but no one speaks. When he resumes, his voice is quieter. He says the book felt out of place. Not wrong, not impossible, out of place. The file explains why the register was not dismissed as a prank or clerical error. The paper stock matches the period when the school was operational. The binding corresponds with district-issued materials. The ink composition aligns with pens commonly used by faculty at the time. There were no signs of recent handling that would suggest fabrication. The register is real. That point is never challenged. What follows is a timeline reconstructed from partial records and interviews conducted months apart. The gaps are noted, but not filled. The school closed in late spring. The register entry is dated mid-autumn, nearly a year later. The building was locked during that entire interval. The alarm system logs show no breaches. The file includes statements from former administrative staff. They are cooperative, polite. Some are relieved to be asked about the school again. Others seem uneasy, though they cannot articulate why. Several interviews end early. Not abruptly in the sense of raised voices or refusal, they simply taper off. The archivist notes that respondents begin answering slowly, as if weighing each word longer than necessary. One former teacher stops mid-sentence and asks if the register is still marked. When told yes, she nods once and says she has nothing further to add. Another insists on reviewing the photograph before commenting. He studies it in silence for almost a minute, then asks for a copy. The request is denied. He does not argue. He thanks the archivist and leaves. Staff logs for the final year are incomplete. This is not unusual in its own. Schools accumulate paperwork unevenly. Things are lost during transitions. Boxes are mislabeled. Entire cabinets go missing between buildings. But the pattern here is specific. Logs from the final months exist. Logs from the months immediately following closure exist as well. Inspections, final walkthroughs, utility shutdown confirmations. The gap falls between. The period when the register entry is dated. Pages that should document nothing at all are missing. Attendance records from previous years are present, but inconsistent. Some classrooms have full rosters, others are missing days. In several cases, pages appear to have been removed carefully, not torn. No explanation accompanies the absence. The file notes this without emphasis. It does not speculate. Interviews with inspectors follow.
Fire safety officials, structural assessors, insurance representatives all confirm they had no reason to enter the building during the period in question. All insist that if they had, it would have been logged. One inspector pauses during his interview and asks whether the name has been released publicly. It has not. He exhales slowly and says that's probably for the best. When asked why, he says only that some things invite attention if spoken aloud. The archivists involved in File 007 add their own observations in a separate section. This is uncommon but permitted in unresolved cases. They describe a shared reluctance to finalize the file. Not disagreement, not concern over procedure, a discomfort that manifests in small delays. One archivist admits she avoided signing the review form for several days, though she could not explain the hesitation. Another notes that the register was returned to its storage sleeve multiple times after being removed for review, as if it were easier to keep it contained. They do not describe fear. They are careful about that. Fear implies anticipation, a sense of threat. What they describe is closer to interruption, the feeling that something ongoing was being paused prematurely. The name marked present is discussed at length. Its origin cannot be traced. It does not appear in district enrollment databases. It does not match census records within a reasonable geographic radius. Variations in spelling yield nothing. The archivists consider the possibility of a nickname or alias. This leads nowhere. The name exists only in the register, only on that page, only on that date. The file includes a note explaining why the case was sealed rather than resolved or dismissed. There is no evidence of wrongdoing, no vandalism, no fraud, no intrusion that can be prosecuted or explained through known means. At the same time, there is no satisfactory explanation for the presence of the mark. Closing the file would require an assumption, either that the entry does not matter or that it represents something ordinary that simply cannot be reconstructed. No one involved is willing to make that assumption. Several describe the same sensation when reviewing the register. Not fear, a subtle pressure, as if acknowledging the entry as final would be an act of erasure, as if closing the file would remove the only proof that something or someone had been there at all. One archivist writes that the mark feels unfinished. Another uses the word ongoing. The file includes a final summary before the seal is applied. It states that file 007 will remain open indefinitely, pending new information or contextual relevance. It recommends restricted access, not due to sensitivity, but to prevent casual review. The reasoning is understated. Repeated exposure to the material has resulted in noticeable discomfort among staff. No one reports nightmares. No one reports seeing or hearing anything unusual. They simply prefer not to engage with it longer than necessary. The seal is applied. The register is stored in a climate-controlled archive, placed on a shelf among thousands of others. Its location is logged, its condition monitored. Yet even after sealing, the file is checked more often than required. Archivists pass by its shelf and glance at the label. Inspectors ask about it without knowing why. The name remains marked present, not contested, not corrected, not explained. And as long as that mark exists without context, the file resists closure. Not because it threatens, but because it insists. Someone was here, and the record refuses to forget it.
Before it became a file, before it became a question, the school was simply there. It sat a few blocks off the main road, close enough to hear traffic in the mornings, far enough that the sound softened by the time it reached the classrooms. A low building, brick faded by weather, windows replaced one at a time over decades, never quite matching. The town around it was small, not forgotten, not collapsing, just quiet. Most people worked close to home. Shops opened early and closed on time. The same faces appeared at the same counters every morning. There were years when nothing changed at all, and years when change came slowly enough that no one noticed until it had already passed. The school fit into that rhythm. It did not stand out. It did not need to. Each morning, the first bell rang before the sun fully cleared the roofs. Its sound carried farther than expected, bouncing off houses and storefronts, slipping through open windows. Parents learned to measure time by it. So did children, even the ones who pretended not to listen. Backpacks were packed the night before, lunches wrapped in paper, shoes tied quickly, often poorly, to save seconds. Children walked in groups, some loud, some half asleep. They took the same routes every day, cut through the same yards, waited at the same corners. Older ones walked ahead, pretending they weren't watching for the younger ones to keep up. The playground sat behind the building, its surface uneven from years of use. Dust clung to shoes and knees. The swings creaked in a way no one ever bothered to fix because they always had. Teachers arrived early. Some stayed late. They unlocked classrooms with keys worn smooth by habit. They wiped chalkboards clean even when yesterday's lesson might have carried over just fine. They straightened desks that would be out of alignment again before the day ended. There were teachers who counted the days to retirement. There were teachers who couldn't imagine doing anything else. Most fell somewhere in between. They knew the students by first name, sometimes by family history. They knew who needed extra time and who needed space. They knew which silences meant concentration and which meant trouble. Nothing about the school felt exceptional. That was its strength. The attendance register was part of the morning ritual. Names called, responses given, a pause if someone was late, a note made in the margin, a mark placed beside a name to confirm presence. It was a small act, but it mattered. Being marked present meant more than physical location. It meant you were accounted for, seen, included in the day's unfolding. The register lived on the teacher's desk, moved only when necessary. Its pages filled steadily over the years, a quiet record of ordinary mornings. Outside, the town continued its routine. Delivery trucks followed predictable routes, the same radio station played in shop windows. Notices were pinned to the community board and left there until they curled at the corners. Nothing pressed in on the school, no sense of danger, no anticipation of loss. Afternoons ended with another bell. Children spilled back onto the streets, energy released all at once. Teachers watched until the last one turned the corner, then returned to empty classrooms. Some lingered, grading papers, rearranging lesson plans, sitting quietly at their desks, listening to the building settle. There was comfort in that sound. The walls held heat, the floors remembered footsteps. The school felt used, and that mattered too. Years passed this way. Budget meetings came and went. Enrollment dipped gradually as families moved closer to the city. Class sizes shrank, some rooms were closed off, supplies were shared more carefully. Still, nothing felt wrong. The school adapted. It always had. When the decision to close it was finally announced, it did not come as a shock, not entirely. There were meetings, letters sent home, reassurances given, promises that students would be cared for, that transitions would be smooth. Teachers packed their rooms slowly. Some took posters home, some left them behind. Desks were stacked, cabinets emptied. The register was returned to its place, as it always was, waiting for the next morning that never came. The final day passed without ceremony. No speeches, no assemblies, just a shorter schedule and a longer silence afterwards. The last bell rang.
Children walked home together, still talking, still laughing, unaware of how final the sound had been. Teachers locked doors behind them, assuming they would be back for something they'd forgotten. Most never were. The building sat quiet. At first, the silence felt temporary. Dust settled gently, as if expecting to be disturbed. Sunlight traced the same paths across the floors. The playground waited. Time moved differently once the doors were locked. Weeks passed, then months. The town adjusted. Children learned new routes to new schools. Teachers found other work or retired. The building faded into the background of daily life, present but unused. No one spoke of it much. There was no reason to. Nothing had gone wrong. That is what makes the later questions heavier, because there was no fracture point, no disaster that redefined the space, no single moment that changed how people remembered it. The school did not end in tragedy. It ended in quiet, which is why its later disturbance feels so personal. Why the idea of someone being marked present after the doors were locked
unsettles in a way that shouting never could. Because to mark someone present requires intention. It requires belief in routine. It assumes a world where mornings still begin the same way. The archivists studying the file return to this chapter often, not because it offers answers, but because it establishes what was lost. A place where presence was ordinary, where being counted was automatic, where the register existed to confirm what everyone already knew, that people were there, together, safe enough not to think about what absence might mean. The silence that followed the closure did not feel ominous at first. It felt deserved, a building resting after years of use. But silence changes when it outlasts expectation, when it extends beyond memory, when it becomes the default state. That is when a single mark stands out, not as a threat, but as a reminder that the systems we build to record our lives do not always stop when we do. That sometimes the most unsettling thing is not what happens during chaos, but what happens after everything is supposed to be over. Before the doors were locked, the school was a place of routine. After, it became a place of residue. And somewhere between those states, someone returned to a desk, opened a register, and refused to let the record end quietly. That refusal is what the file carries forward. Not fear, not spectacle, just the weight of ordinary life interrupted too gently to be ignored.
Nothing breaks all at once. It never does. The first changes are small enough to dismiss, small enough to blame on long days and short nights, on the ordinary exhaustion that settles into a place after years of doing the same thing over and over. The school is still open at this point. The bells still ring, the hallways still fill and empty on schedule. If you were to stand outside, nothing would appear different. Inside, though, the register begins to hesitate. It starts with a student whose attendance becomes inconsistent. Not absent exactly, just uneven. Present 3 days in a row, then gone for 2, then back again without explanation. No doctor's notes, no calls from home, no visible signs of illness or trouble. When asked, the student shrugs, says they were here, or that they thought they were. The answer is quiet, uncertain. Teachers note it, but lightly, a small mark in the margin, a reminder to follow up later. Later never comes. There are other things to manage. A teacher begins correcting the register twice, once in the morning, as always, then again at the end of the day. It is not required, no policy suggests it, but she does it anyway, scanning the names slowly, as if something might have shifted since morning. She tells herself she's being thorough, that she's just tired, that the days blur together when the semester stretches on without a break. When a colleague notices and asks why, she laughs it off. Just making sure, she says. The register remains on her desk longer than usual. A name appears that never gets crossed out. Most names change daily, present one day, absent the next. Late, excused, unexcused. The ink tells a story of movement, of children coming and going through routine. This one does not. The mark stays, even on days when the student is visibly not in their seat, even on days when substitutes fill in and mark attendance again. The name remains present. At first, the teacher assumes a mistake. She reaches for the pen to correct it, then pauses. Something about the page feels finished. She tells herself she'll fix it tomorrow. Tomorrow arrives, the correction does not. None of this is written down, not formally. No reports are filed, no meetings are called. The irregularities are discussed in passing, in staff rooms and hallways, framed as inconvenience rather than concern. People are tired. That explanation fits easily. The school is understaffed, class sizes have shifted, administrative support is thinner than it used to be. Everyone is carrying more than their share. Fatigue explains a lot.
A teacher misplaces her keys twice in 1 week. Another forgets to collect homework she assigned herself. The copier jams more often than it should. The clock in the main hall runs slow. Normal problems, annoying but familiar. The register becomes heavier, not physically, emotionally. Teachers flip through its pages more carefully now, fingers lingering at the edges. They double-check dates, count names twice. It becomes common to hear someone mutter under their breath when marking attendance, as if the act requires more concentration than before. One teacher admits quietly that calling out names feels different. She can't explain how, just that the room seems to listen more closely. When she finishes, the silence feels longer than it used to. She does not say this out loud. She writes it off as imagination. The student with inconsistent attendance is spoken about in vague terms. Going through something, someone says. Probably family issues, another adds. The explanations stack up, thin but reassuring. No one wants to be the person who suggests something stranger. That kind of suggestion feels irresponsible, unprofessional, and unnecessary. When the student's desk remains empty for a full week, the teacher marks them absent. The next day, the mark is still present, not overwritten, not erased, just there. She stares at it longer than she should. Then she sighs, rubs her eyes, and tells herself she must have made the mark herself without remembering. Long days do that. They create gaps. The register is stored in the same place every afternoon, but teachers begin checking its position before leaving. A small habit, unnoticed at first, a glance to confirm it hasn't been moved. It always is where it should be. That too is reassuring. Substitute teachers report feeling uncertain when filling it out. They follow the instructions left on the desk, but later admit they didn't feel confident they'd done it correctly. The handwriting looks different to them. Too neat, too deliberate. They assume it belongs to someone else, someone more careful. The administration remains unaware, or chooses to remain so. When attendance numbers don't quite align with head counts, the discrepancy is minor, 1 or 2 names, easily explained by late arrivals or early departures. The system absorbs the error without complaint. It is designed to. The cracks widen slowly. A teacher dreams she is calling names into an empty room. She awakes before anyone answers. Another begins locking her classroom door during lunch, though there is no reason to. She cannot explain why she started doing it. She just feels better when the door is closed. None of this is documented. These are not events. They are impressions, and impressions are easy to ignore. Human beings are good at that. We prefer explanations that preserve the shape of the world we recognize. We choose fatigue over fracture, routine over disruption. We tell ourselves that the discomfort will pass once we rest, once the term ends, once the weekend arrives. But the register does not rest. It continues to record. Not accurately, not inaccurately, just persistently. A name remains present without drawing attention to itself. It does not demand explanation. It simply refuses to be corrected. The teachers, the staff, the students, everyone continues on, slightly off balance, adjusting without realizing it. They step around the small discomforts the way people step around a loose floorboard they've learned to expect. No one believes anything is wrong. That belief holds, right up until it doesn't, because denial is not a conscious act. It is a quiet agreement we make with ourselves, that the world we know is still intact, that the cracks are cosmetic, that the record will eventually correct itself. The register waits. It does not hurry them. It has learned patience from the building that holds it. And in the space between what is noticed and what is acknowledged, the file begins to take shape. Not as a mystery, not yet, but as a series of moments no one thought worth writing down. The kind that only makes sense after everything else has already been lost. The final day did not announce itself. There is no red line drawn through the calendar. No notation in the margins to suggest importance. In the records, it appears like any other weekday. That is part of the problem. The morning begins with weather. Overcast, according to the regional report. Low clouds, the kind that flatten sound. The temperature mild enough that coats are carried instead of worn. The air holds moisture without rain. Students arrive in small groups, some earlier than usual, some late. No one remembers why. The first bell rings at 8:10 a.m., or possibly 8:12. Accounts differ. The clock in the main hallway had been drifting for weeks. Maintenance was scheduled, but never completed. Teachers adjusted by instinct, students followed them. Classrooms fill. Chairs scrape softly against tile, backpacks are dropped, jackets hung or left draped over chair backs. Someone taps a pencil against a desk until told to stop. The building sounds occupied, alive. Attendance is taken in the usual order. Names read aloud, responses given. Some voices louder than others. A pause for one student who arrives after the list is moved on. The register is marked. Who holds the pen is unclear. The homeroom teacher insists it was her. She remembers the weight of the book, the way it opened automatically to the correct page. She remembers thinking the binding needed repair. A substitute covering the adjacent class believes he handled it briefly when the teacher stepped out to speak with administration. Both accounts are calm. Neither feels definitive. The first period passes without incident. Lessons proceed, notes are written. A quiz is postponed because the copier fails again. Laughter breaks out in one room and is quickly contained. At 9:05, a student leaves class to use the restroom. No one remembers them returning. At 9:47, a teacher writes a time in the margin of her lesson plan that does not correspond with the bell schedule. She circles it, confused, then crosses it out. At 10:20, the second bell rings. Or perhaps it doesn't. Some recall hearing it faintly. Others say the transition happened naturally, as if everyone knew it was time to move on without being told. Hallways fill briefly. Lockers open and close. Someone drops a stack of papers and kneels to gather them, apologizing too much. The register remains in the same classroom, placed at the corner of the desk, open. This is unusual. Normally, it is closed after attendance is taken, slid into a drawer, or stacked beneath textbooks. Leaving it open exposes the page to smudges, to mistakes. No one remembers deciding to leave it that way. By mid-morning, the clouds have lowered. Light through the windows dulls. Rooms feel smaller. Teachers turn on lamps rather than overhead lights. The hum is softer. At 11:15, a student is marked absent in one class and present in another. The discrepancy is noted, but not resolved. At 9:42, an announcement is made over the intercom. Or perhaps it doesn't. Some remember a voice that cut out halfway through a sentence. Others insist the intercom stayed silent all day. The logs show no announcement recorded. Lunch begins at 12:05. The cafeteria smells like disinfectant and reheated food. Trays slide along metal rails. Conversations overlap. Someone laughs too loudly and then stops. A teacher notices a student sitting alone at a table usually shared. She considers asking if everything is all right. She does not. The register is moved during lunch. This much is certain. A cafeteria aide remembers seeing it on a chair near the teacher's table. She thought it odd, but assumed someone had forgotten it. No one admits to carrying it there. No one recalls taking it back. After lunch, the building feels quieter. Not empty, just subdued. Afternoon classes begin. Energy dips.
Chairs creak more often, pens drop, windows are cracked open despite the cool air.
At 1:18, a fire drill is scheduled according to the calendar. It does not occur. No alarm sounds, no evacuation follows. Later, administrators insist the drill was postponed. No one can find the notice confirming this. At 1:43, a teacher glances at the register again. The page is still open, the same name still marked present. She frowns. She considers correcting it. The moment passes. At 2:10, dismissal approaches. Students pack up early, zippers hum, chairs are nudged back into place. Teachers give reminders about homework that will never be collected. The final bell rings. Or it should have. Some remember the sound clearly. Others remember only the movement that followed, as if the bell were implied rather than heard. Students exit the building in loose clusters. Goodbyes are exchanged without emphasis. See you tomorrow. See you later. Teachers remain behind, grading, cleaning, preparing for the next day. One teacher straightens desks that do not need straightening. Another erases a board that will not be written on again. The register is returned to the desk, or left there. Accounts conflict. At 3:32, the last student is seen leaving the grounds. At 3:30, the building is mostly empty. By 4:45, a teacher locks her classroom door and pauses, hand still on the handle. She feels as if she is forgetting something. She cannot identify what. She leaves anyway. By 4:10, only a few staff remain. Lights are turned off one by one. The halls darken unevenly. At 4:37, the main entrance is locked. At least it is supposed to be. The security log records the action. What it does not record is the register. It is not signed out. It is not logged into storage. It is not mentioned in any end-of-day checklist. It simply remains, somewhere between the desk and the archive room that will never receive it. The day ends without ceremony. No alarms, no emergency, no final walkthrough that feels different from the ones before it. The school does not announce that it is finished. It simply stops. Later, when archivists reconstruct this timeline, they note the absence of rupture. No single moment explains the lingering presence of the mark. No clear point where the ordinary becomes the unresolved. The final operational day dissolves into memory the way all ordinary days do, unevenly, imperfectly, with details that refuse to line up. What remains consistent is the register, handled, moved, left open, marked, and never fully put away. The building closes, the routine ends, but something in the process remains unfinished, not broken, just incomplete, as if the day never reached its natural conclusion, as if the act of recording presence continued after the world it belonged to quietly stepped aside. The school never closes itself, and neither does the file.
The turning point does not arrive with force. There is no meeting that feels decisive, no raised voices, no moment where anyone understands they are standing at the edge of something unfinished. The school closes for administrative reasons. That phrase appears repeatedly in the records. Administrative reasons. Budget constraints, declining enrollment, consolidation plans approved months earlier. It is the kind of ending that does not feel like an ending at all. Staff are reassigned. Some transfer to neighboring schools, others accept reduced hours. A few retire earlier than planned. Farewells are brief, practical. Promises to stay in touch are exchanged without urgency. Students are relocated. New routes, new uniforms, new classrooms that smell different. Children adapt quickly, as they always do. Parents reassure themselves that change is normal. The building is scheduled for closure.
Locks are changed, utilities are shut down in stages, a date is set for final handover, a checklist is printed. Everything proceeds according to policy. Almost everything. The register remains inside. No one notices at first, or rather, no one notices enough to stop the process. This is where things begin to fail, not dramatically, but incrementally, one assumption layered on top of another, each small enough to seem harmless. There is no final audit, not in the way the procedures require. The checklist includes a line item for classroom materials, removed or secured. It is initialed without elaboration. The person responsible assumes the teachers cleared their rooms. The teachers assumed administration handled central records. The register does not belong to anyone by the end. It used to belong to the classroom. Now the classroom belongs to no one. There is no official attendance closure, no final mark to indicate the end of record keeping, no signature stating that the register has reached its conclusion and will be archived accordingly. Attendance systems are designed for continuity, not cessation. They assume tomorrow. When tomorrow is removed, the system stalls. No responsibility is assigned, not deliberately. Responsibility dissolves in transition. It thins out as people move desks, offices, and routines. What remains is a shape without ownership. The register sits on the desk when the building is locked. The door closes. The sound echoes down the hall and fades. From that moment on, the record exists without a context to end it. This is not negligence in the criminal sense. No rules were knowingly broken. No one sought to avoid accountability. The failure is quieter, a series of reasonable decisions made without coordination, a system that assumed someone else would complete the final step. The human cost does not appear immediately. It rarely does. A teacher refuses to talk about it later. When contacted during the archival review, she declines politely, says she doesn't remember much from that year, says it was a stressful time. When asked specifically about the register, she goes quiet. Then she says she prefers not to revisit it, not because of fear, because of exhaustion. She says she spent too long trying to do everything right while the structure around her loosened, that by the end, she was just trying to get through each day without falling behind. She did not want to think about what might have been missed. A former student avoids the street where the school stands. This detail comes from a neighbor, not from the student directly. They say he takes a longer route home now, even years later, that he crosses the road early and looks away as he passes the building. When asked why, he shrugs. It just feels unfinished, he says. He cannot explain what he means. He remembers liking school well enough. No trauma, no incident. Just a lingering sense that something was left behind that should have been carried forward. A clerk admits they altered nothing and regrets it. This admission appears in a supplemental note written years after the closure. The clerk had been responsible for processing end-of-year documents. She remembers seeing the register listed, but not physically receiving it. She assumed it had already been filed. She says she noticed the absence briefly, then moved on. There was too much happening, she writes. Everyone was transitioning. I didn't think it mattered. She adds a sentence later in a different pen. I think about it more than I should. None of these accounts describe a catastrophe. No one was harmed, no emergency response was triggered. That is what makes the case difficult to categorize. Archives are built to contain outcomes. This file contains an absence of outcome. The problem was not a disaster, it was neglect. Not neglect born of indifference, but of diffusion. Care spread so thin it lost its edge. The system did not fail loudly enough to demand correction. It failed quietly enough to persist. The register remains inside the locked building for months, then years. When it is finally discovered, it feels as though it has been waiting.
not actively, patiently. The archivists reviewing the case return often to this chapter, not because it offers mystery, but because it offers responsibility without malice. It is easier to accept harm caused by intent, harder to sit with harm caused by omission. Nothing supernatural is required to explain what went wrong, only ordinary people, overwhelmed and undersupported, moving on without ceremony. The register did what it was designed to do. It continued. The system around it stopped, and because no one told the record to end, it did not. The file notes this plainly. The failure was procedural, the impact was human, and the consequence lingers not because something reached out from the past, but because no one reached back to finish what they started. The school closed, the doors were locked, the lights went out, but the record never received permission to stop paying attention. That is what went wrong. Not a single act, but the absence of a final one. When records refuse to explain themselves, people begin to. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly, in rooms where voices are kept low and conclusions are never written in ink. File 007 attracts this kind of attention, not because it is dramatic, but because it is incomplete. Over time, a small set of explanations emerges. None are formal findings, none are endorsed. They circulate instead as working thoughts, ways to stand near the question without stepping too close. Each theory is reasonable. Each one fails. Clerical oversight. This is the explanation people reach for first. It requires the least imagination. A mistake made during a period of transition, a register left open, a final mark written out of habit, a date carried forward without thought, no one noticing because no one was looking for problems anymore. Schools are full of paperwork. They survive on routine. When routine collapses, errors slip through quietly. This theory fits the context, the understaffing, the fatigue, the absence of a final audit. It explains how a single register could be overlooked when everything else was being dismantled and reassigned. Archivists note that most institutional anomalies begin this way, not with intention, but with assumption. Someone thought someone else had checked. Someone else thought it didn't matter. But the date resists this explanation. Clerical mistakes tend to repeat themselves. They ripple outward. One error creates others nearby. Here, there is only one. The handwriting is steady. The ink is consistent. The mark is placed with care. It does not look rushed. It does not look accidental. And no other errors surround it. The oversight theory explains how something might be missed. It does not explain why this one thing appears finished when everything else was falling apart. Post-closure access. Someone entered the building after it was locked. This theory introduces intent. It suggests that the mark was made deliberately, outside the school's operational timeline, that someone had access, authorized or otherwise, and chose to use it. There is some support for this. The building was not monitored continuously. The alarm system was basic. The neighborhood was quiet. Keys circulate longer than records admit. Windows are not always sealed as well as reports claim. It is possible. The register was not secured. It was left behind. It was reachable. But the question of motive lingers. Why enter an abandoned school to mark attendance? Why leave everything else untouched? No theft, no vandalism, no message. Only one name, only one mark. Trespass usually leaves disorder. This act leaves restraint. Archivists note that even nostalgia-driven intrusions, former students returning to old schools, tend to involve wandering, touching, moving things. This did not. It was precise, which makes it difficult to believe without knowing who would benefit from it, and no one does.
Psychological projection. This theory turns inward. It suggests that the anomaly may be less about the register and more about the people interpreting it. Memory is unreliable, especially when layered with loss. The school closed quietly. Teachers dispersed. Students were absorbed elsewhere. The absence of a dramatic ending may have created space for discomfort to grow unchecked. According to this explanation, the date may have been misremembered, the closure timeline compressed in hindsight, the register elevated in importance because it was one of the few tangible remnants left behind. Handwriting analysis becomes central here. Experts disagree. Some claim the handwriting matches that of a known teacher. Others say the pressure and slant are inconsistent. Some argue that stress alters handwriting enough to invalidate comparison altogether. No consensus is reached. This theory explains the unease. It explains the hesitation. It explains how ordinary details can feel charged when revisited years later. But it struggles with the name. No one recognizes it. Not partially, not as a nickname, not as a variant spelling. Projection can distort memory. It rarely invents a single isolated record without reference.
This theory is never formalized. It exists only in marginal notes and conversations that stop when someone enters the room. The idea is uncomfortable, that someone noticed early, that someone realized the mark did not belong there, and that instead of correcting it, they chose not to. Not out of malice, out of reluctance. Correcting the record would require explanation. Explanation would require admitting uncertainty. And uncertainty in institutions is treated as a liability. It is easier to leave things as they are. The longer the mark remained, the harder it became to remove. Eventually, removing it would raise more questions than leaving it. Guilt often presents itself as protocol. There's no clear process for this. It's already been logged. It's too late now. This theory accounts for the discomfort, for the way staff avoid speaking the name, for the resistance to closing the file. But again, the origin remains unresolved. Intentional silence explains why it stayed. It does not explain how it began. Someone still had to write it. Someone still had to choose that date. Archivists reviewing File 007 do not rank these theories. They are presented side by side, each annotated, each questioned. The file contains no conclusion. That is deliberate. In the margins of the final review, one archivist writes a sentence that is later underlined by someone else. Every explanation asks us to believe something incomplete. Another note appears beneath it, written months later. Maybe that is the point. The register remains unchanged. The name is still marked present. The date still refuses to align with anything else in the record. The file stays open, not because it threatens to become something more, but because closing it would require certainty that no one can honestly claim. There is no final page that resolves the question, no authoritative voice that declares the truth, only doubt preserved carefully. The archive does not exist to comfort, it exists to remember what cannot be resolved. And in this case, what remains is not fear, not spectacle, but the quiet persistence of a record that insists someone was there, even when the system built to account for them had already moved on. Why the name stayed is still unknown. What is known is this: someone was marked present. No one erased it. And every attempt to explain that decision leaves something unfinished behind. The file remains open, not as a warning, but as a reminder that absence is easy to close around, and presence, once recorded, is much harder to dismiss. Years passed before anyone returned to the building. The town had moved on. Streets were repaved. Shops changed hands. Children who had once run across the playground grew into adults with other memories, other routines. The school stood empty. Windows were boarded, some broken. The halls smelled of damp plaster, dust, and the faintly sweet tang of aging paper. Nature began its slow reclamation. Moss crept along the edges of stairwells, vines pressed against window frames. Floors flexed under their own weight, producing the groans of a building settling into silence. The register was eventually removed. Not immediately, not ceremoniously, not in any way that resembled closure. It was found in a classroom locked long after staff and students had gone, still open to that same page. No one corrected the mark. No one crossed it out. No official note was ever made. It was returned to storage, placed alongside other archival documents, cataloged and filed, a number assigned, a barcode applied, a location recorded. Yet it was still unresolved. The file remained sealed, not out of secrecy, not out of fear, because no one could explain why the mark existed. Former staff described it differently. Some admitted to dreams about classrooms they no longer visited, not nightmares, not horrific visions, just repetition. Rows of desks lined up in familiar patterns, names being called, attendance taken, the same name always marked present, always at the same moment. In the dreams, they could never reach the register in time. They could never close the book. One clerk recalled waking in the dark, fingers curled as though holding a pen, a vague sense of responsibility pressing across her chest. She had altered nothing, she had left it alone, and she still remembered. The building remained empty for decades. Occasionally, inspectors entered. They cataloged the condition of the structure, they noted structural decay, they recorded air quality, the state of the wiring, the status of the roof. They checked doors and locks. They logged everything in neat spreadsheets. The register was never forgotten. It was moved to an archival room, climate-controlled, carefully boxed, tagged, preserved. Yet the page remained open. The final mark never changed. Archivists reviewing File 007 describe a subtle tension in this persistence. Not fear, not dread, a presence that was recorded. And yet, no one could confirm it had ever truly existed in the way a student or teacher might exist. The tragedy lies not in the presence itself, nor in some imagined intruder. It lies in the absence of understanding. The world outside the school moved on. Teachers retired, students graduated, clerks relocated, and the record remained. It did not speak, it did not demand attention, it only waited. Not for accountability, not for correction, not for explanation, but for recognition. The final lines in the file emphasize this quietly. Not the horror of someone being there, not the fear of what might have happened, but the quiet, unacknowledged mystery that someone or something was present, and no one knew why they were not gone. The school is gone now, or nearly gone. The walls that once held life and noise decay under wind and rain. The playground is grassed over, the chalkboard rotted. Yet the mark remains in the register. The name is still present. The file stays open. And in that persistent presence, a lesson is contained. Some records do not end. Some absences are heavier than any presence. And some questions are preserved patiently, without answer.